So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker, which is Lars-Åke Augustsson from Amnesty Sweden. He's a longtime member of the Amnesty Action Group working against the death penalty in Sweden. But I have asked the panelists to make a short introduction to themselves before they start. So I'll leave that to you, Lars-Åke. Over to you.
Okay. You hear me? Okay. Yeah, my name is a bit mysterious. My name is Augustsson, Lars-Åke Augustsson, and I'm a writer and a reporter and have written extensively on the death penalty in the US for over 20 years. And my 50 minutes I try to dispose like this, that I would start with a general overview of the current situation on the death penalty in the US. Then I would discuss what currents there are, what you could call cultural wars, politically charges. Okay. I'm back. Some politically charged questions, and then that's it. So for the current situation, then my general main source is, as always, the Death Penalty Information Center. So if you have any further questions, I would recommend that you check out their website, Death Penalty Information Center. That's the best website you will find, dpic.org, but you just Google it and you find it. And all my most of my figures are from there. First, most current facts as of last week as regards executions. We have had 19 executions in 2023, 3 in Oklahoma, 5 in Texas, 4 in Missouri, 6 in Florida, 1 in Alabama. And for the rest of 2023, there are 7 executions scheduled. Likely some of them will be stayed or not even take place. Then, as a general background, you can say that if you go back where we have full statistics, 2022, there were 21 executions in 2022 and 50 new death sentences. This means that it's a typical year, as ghastly as it is this year, and the 2022 and probably also 2023 will be among the lowest figures since the beginning of the 90s. The worst years were around in the end of the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s. You can check it out at dpi.org, as I said. The 2 worst states last year were Texas and Florida, and that's also typical. As of current situation on how many are sentenced to death, as of January this year, there were a bit over 2,300 people on death row, and the number of states with or jurisdictions are more or less the same, is 29, and jurisdictions without death penalty are 24. And among these 29 with the death penalty, states like Oregon and Wyoming, they have the death penalty, but they have no person sentenced to death. As regard public opinion, it's more or less stable also. It's around, as Gallup of last year, about 1 year ago, that was about 55% of US adults favor the death penalty for convicted murders. And that's about what it usually is. If you figure out other questions to exchange the death penalty for life without parole, you get lower figures, but I won't go into that. Then a bit about the cultural surroundings of the death penalty. When I started out around the year 2000, there was a high acceptance of the death penalty. Many people were sentenced to death, and politicians could get a lot of mileage out of being pro-death penalty. That is no longer the question. It's not a big issue, which is bad in its way, but it's not something that will make you especially popular to be for the death penalty. And now, having said that, you could see a shift during the Trump years, the former president, because in 2019 and 2020, they went on a killing spree as regard the federal death penalty. The federal death penalty, you can look that up also. It's a kind of special death penalty, but you have federal prisoners in a special prison in Indiana, and they who have been sentenced to federal death penalty. You haven't had a federal execution since 2003. Then in 2019, they started to execute 13 people on federal death row. So 2019 to 2020, without anything especially that happened, they found it to be some kind of political advantage to execute these people. So that was one very, very clear shift. And then what has happened generally when it comes to legislation and so on during this year, you can see that the states, some states are in the lead. The worst death penalty state now is Florida, or execution-wise. It's Florida. That's the state with a high number of executions, and they have also changed the law when it comes to death penalty. Who gets the death sentence? In the general rule is that you have to have an anonymous verdict from the jury to sentence someone to death. But some states have you don't have to be unified in the jury, and Florida has sort of gone in the lead there. They only need to convince 8 of the 12 jurors that defendant should get the death penalty to actually give him the death penalty. So out of the 24 states that actively carry out the death penalty, just 3 states have that sort of rule that you don't have to have a unified jury. And the worst of those are Florida. And another notorious state, of course, is Alabama. They had several botched executions where the protocol they generally use, as you know, in executions is lethal injections, but I have had a lot of troubles with that, and haven't been able to kill people as quickly as they can. Now they have started to, like some other states, to discuss another execution method called nitrogen hypoxia, which means nitrogen kväve in Swedish is if you don't get oxygen, if you don't get nitrogen, which is a part of the air we all breathe, then you will die eventually. So the idea is to give the person that is to be executed just nitrogen, and he will die from that. And that should be a sort of painless death, which no one knows anything about, actually. But they have not started using this protocol, but some states, among those are Alabama, or have that method. And some other method that you have heard about, that to get away from the problem, so to speak, that it's hard to get these chemicals, is they have started going back to the execution by firing squad. And Idaho, don't have any executions lined up, but they have, together with some other states, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Utah, and South Carolina, have now also adopted per execution by firing squad as an alternative to lethal injection. So that's it. The general, to sum it up, it's been a typical year for the death penalty in the US. No one makes not much fuss about it, actually, which is kind of cruel in itself, but that is the way it is. Okay.
Thank you so much, Lars-Åke. As we do have a few more minutes for you, I wanted to ask you, what do you think will happen with the issue of the death penalty in the coming 5 years? You mentioned Florida, and obviously the governor of Florida is Ron DeSantis, who is also running for president, competing with Donald Trump. What do you think? What would happen, for example, if either of them will become the new president or president again in the case of Donald Trump, especially given the context of this so-called cultural war?
No, actually, I don't think much will happen, because not much happened during the Trump years, except for this mass killing of people on the federal death row. And for these people, you have to, they sort of go with the flow. They sort of feel in the air what's going. Now it's mainly against LGBT people, against drag queens, this culture, killers, not so much, actually, because there is so much killing going on in the US. So it's because of the proliferation of guns and so on. So killing is a very common thing, happens every day in the US. The most common cause of death for people under 20 years of age is they get killed. So people are getting numb to that, and I don't think you even Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump, if they have find some mileage in that question, they had surely with their instinct used it, but it's not a big question, actually.
Thank you, Lars-Åke. We have actually one more question, and since we have a little bit of time, I'll let Diana Bendik-Stenberg, do you want to ask your question or your comment yourself?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for your presentation, Lars-Åke. I have a question. What is your opinion or your judgment about the current situation with the democratic government? because I mean they promised quite a lot. They had a lot of statements against the death penalty. Basically all democratic candidates were strongly opposed the death penalty, but Joe Biden made a lot of promises, but nothing happens. Do they ignore it, or do they have a lot of issues? We have a lot of international crises, we all know that, and is it the simple fact that they just prioritize other things more? How would you judge the Democrats on the subject?
I don't. It's a good question. It's not a big question for them either. You could see that after this killing spree on federal death row, they haven't changed much with the current Attorney General. He hasn't either done anything about this. So it's about what politicians are willing to do within these systems, and Democrats, they don't find any mileage in talking about the death penalty either. So it's not with all the other problems. Says something about the US today, actually.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lars-Åke, and thank you, Diana. So I will then move on to our next speaker, which is Siroos from Amnesty Austria. And I'll give the floor to you and let you introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much. I start to share my presentation. Okay, is it okay? Thank you. So as you see, my affiliation, I'm a nuclear medicine physician in Vienna, and I'm a member of Amnesty Medical Group of Austria, and also a member of Webbinariet, which is an organization for support of survivors of torture and war in Vienna, and also a member of Medical Professionals for Human Rights in Iran. As my topic is to speak about the situation in Iran, I will just go through, and some statistics will be included. Actual statistic is, as you see here, we had 582 executions in 2022, which was an increase of 75% to the year before. And if we take the statistic of today, from October 22 to October 23, we had 659 executions, which means a plus of 24% to the year before. And the death sentence charges are mostly related to murder, drugs, and also to war against God and prophet and corruption on the earth. Here you see we had 7 people executed during demonstrations during the Massa movement since last year. Some examples: Mohammad Mehdi Karami, Mohsen Shekari, Majid Reza Rahnavard. But the execution is not enough for the Islamic Republic. For example, Rahnavard, he had some symbolic tattoo with a lion and sun on his arm. His arm was burned and broken before he got executed. It means we have some degree of magnification of the violence before execution. And here you see the couple. That's Dr. Hamid Qarahassanlu and his wife. Both of them were arrested, and Dr. Hassanlu was sentenced to death because of some confessions that they obtained from him and from his wife under torture. But according to a lot of international protests, Fortunately, his death sentence was changed to prison sentence. But as you see here, he was severely tortured, ribs fracture, and his treatment in the hospital, as you see here, with some drainage from the thoracic area. The common criticism of all court trials which lead to death sentence last year was, as in other trials in the Islamic Republic, you had no fair trial for the persons with allegations of the crimes that the government gave to them, no adequate legal representation, and confessions which were taken under torture. And I would divide the killings by the states. One part are the executions, but one part are, as you see here, Mahsa was killed on the street. These other young ladies, Sarina Ismailzadeh, Shakar Hamid, Hadith Najafi, all 16 to 20 years old, were killed on the street. And the official declaration was that they committed suicide. They jumped from the second floor and were dead because of the suicide. All young people, a lot of young people committed suicide last year in Iran, yes. And Mahsa was not enough. We had some weeks ago a new case, a copy of the Mahsa case in a metro in Tehran, and it is Amita Garavan, 16 years old, and she's still in coma. And as you see here, she is kept in this hospital, Bimar San Faj hospital, and from the first hour that she was admitted to this hospital, I started to write to find the addresses of the as far as possible, but the homepage of the hospital was closed as she was admitted to the hospital. And here you see examples of further cases of young people who were arrested during the demonstrations for some days, and then they got released from the prison. And after the release, they had suspicious stays or they committed suicide. We don't know what happens. There are some hypotheses. This is another example, Maria Marvin, a lawyer, who also was dead after her release from prison. We think about administration of unknown drugs in the prison, administration of psychoactive substances in the prison, sexual assault. We don't know what is really happening, but that is the reality, that a lot of young people are dead or commit suicide just after being released from prison. Narges Mohammadi, you are aware of her. She won the she won the Nobel Prize for Peace this year. We have been very, very tight in touch with her, in contact with her before he got arrested last time. And this photo she sent for us, for the medical group, the photo of her book about white torture. And she sent me some medical reports before she got arrested, some medical reports from Navid Afkari. Navid Afkari, he was a wrestling champion, also an Amnesty case, was executed in 2020 in his 27 years of age. And she sent me some medical reports confirming that he had some broken bones, especially on the shoulder, under torture. It means we torture and then we execute. Torture alone is not enough for the authorities in Iran. Here you see some statistic of the executions in Iran from 2011 to 2022, almost all years plus minus 600 until 900. And per capita, Iran is 1 year the country with the most number of executions, and 1 year China. They changed the place just from first to second place with China. And here you see that which number of these cases have been drug-related, which number of the executions have been in public, and also the execution of the juveniles. Iran is the leading country for execution of juvenile people. And when we are talking about death penalty, we don't have to forget what happened in Iran in 1988. In 1988, it is according to Amnesty International report, we had at least 5,000 political dissidents who were extrajudicially executed in the prison in Iran. At least 5,000 that we have their names, that are documented in by Amnesty. And 4 people were responsible for this. It was a well-known death committee: Hossein Ali Nayeri, Mortaza Eshraghi, Ibrahim Raisi, Mustafa Mohammadi. And Ibrahim Raisi is the actual president of Iran, and goes to New York holding speeches and everywhere. And another sort of killing people, I hope I'm still in time, another sort of type of killing people in the Islamic Republic is in the prisons, is not execution, is denial of medical care in Iranian prisons. Here you see the statistic by Amnesty in different years, how many people have been killed just by denial of medical care today. And we send all this information also to our World Medical Association that these are, and they made a recommendation against Iran. And here you see in the case of Ahmad Reza Jalali, a physician who was invited by Tehran University and Siroos University to hold a lecture in Iran. He got arrested and sentenced to death because of corruption and errors, invited by 2 biggest universities in Iran for holding a lecture. And here you see him after a long hunger strike. And based on this case and some other cases, as for Dr. Ghara Hasanlu, who was sentenced to death, I wrote some examples of medical personnel who have been imprisoned and sentenced to death, and then the other physicians who have been persecuted by the authority. I sent an application to World Medical Association to make a recommendation that in such countries where the physicians are under persecution, the physicians get death sentence for nothing, that in these countries we should not uphold international medical meetings. And this was the resolution was adopted 2 weeks ago by World Medical Association in Nairobi. So I come to the summary. When we are talking about death penalty, we have to, especially regarding Iran, we have to think about different types of state killings. It is state killing by execution, state killing on the streets, silent killing by denial of medical care, unknown deaths or killing methods after release from prison, and also thinking about the high number of execution of minors in Iran. And Iran is the top also in this field. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Siroos. And you too were very good at keeping within your minutes. So I have time for one follow-up question. And I wanted to ask you, in the past, Amnesty and other campaigners have been able to influence the authorities of Iran regarding the death penalty for example, Iran changed its law regarding death penalty for some drug-related offenses so that fewer people received the death penalty and fewer people were executed. We could also see that on your numbers on the graph that you showed. How do you think, obviously that's no longer the case, the amount of people who have been sentenced to death for drug-related offenses, even fairly small, have raised again. How do you think the chances are for influencing the leaders of Iran regarding the death penalty at the current moment?
It's a very good question. It is always depending on how aggressive the government want to be, or they feel that they can be at this moment very aggressive or not. And also it depends also how much fear do they need to generate in the population. And at the moment, since we have an uprising in different cities in Iran, at the moment the influence will be very, very low, since that the government needs to spread fear. If they feel themselves stabilized, then maybe that would help. But in cases like Dr. Hassanlu, that could help. In general, at the moment, we would not have much success. But in some cases, we could have success, as it has been the case for Dr. Jalali or Dr. Hassanlu. A very high spread of international reactions. They don't want to have it also. It means that Dr. Jalali is still living, that Dr. Hassanlu is living, is only based on the helps by Amnesty and international actions that we had in the last years. For cases, it helps, yes.
Thank you so much, Siroos. Diana, I'm sorry, we're going to move on, but will you hang on to your question and we'll have it at the end? Thank you. Okay, so then I would like to introduce our next speaker, which is Jacob Metz from the medical or healthcare group in Amnesty Denmark. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you very much. I'm a general practitioner, and I have been a member of the Danish medical group against the death penalty for about 40 years. So we have worked with this issue for a long time. I will now start my slide presentation. My presentation will first of all focus on why the death penalty is a medical issue. And secondly, I will briefly describe how we as members of Amnesty and the medical profession work against the death penalty. Charlie Brooks was condemned to death in Texas, United States for the murder of a used car dealer in December 1976. He was executed on 7th December 1982. One more execution in Texas was no sensation. Texas is one of the most executing states in the US. But this time the execution brought headlines to the newspapers. Charlie Brooks was the first prisoner in the US and the world to be executed by medicine. Before his execution, the medical director of the Texas Department of Corrections, Dr. Ralph Gray, examined his arms to see that his veins were suitable for injection and a drip. The lethal injection began at 12:09, and Charlie Brooks was pronounced dead 7 minutes later at 12:16 by Dr. Ralph Gray and Dr. Bascom Bentley, a Huntsville prison doctor. At this stage, the two prison doctors had twice violated fundamental medical ethics. 5 years earlier, in 1977, Dr. J. Chapman, the Oklahoma State medical examiner, proposed a new and less painful method of execution instead of electrocution and gas chamber. It should go as follows: an intravenous saline drip, followed by sleeping medicine, a drug paralyzing the muscles, and finally a drug inducing cardiac arrest. This method was adopted by Oklahoma in 1977 as the first US state, and it highlighted the medical involvement. 1977 was also the year of Amnesty International's Stockholm Declaration on the death penalty. From 1977, the fight against the death penalty was included in Amnesty International's mandate. I will now have a look at the three main reasons why medical doctors and other medical professionals shall care about the death penalty. Saving of lives is a cornerstone in medical ethics. Hippocrates was a prominent Greek doctor living around 400 BC, and the Hippocratic Oath is a fundament for medical ethics. And the text, as you can see, cannot be misunderstood. The death penalty can furthermore be seen as a form of torture. Death penalty as torture is actually the theme of this year's 10th October World Day Against the Death Penalty. The death penalty is torture in at least 4 ways. The first is that the prisoners are often in death row in solitary confinement for many years. In Japan, prisoners are often on death row for decades. Tokyo Detention House is one of the 6 detention centers in Japan with a death row. One Japanese prisoner, now 87-year-old, has been on death row in solitary confinement in the Tokyo Detention House for 45 years. He is now facing a retrial after being temporarily released in 2014. The second is last-minute stays of executions common in the US. Charlie Brooks, the first prisoner executed by lethal injection, his last appeal was rejected only 14 minutes before his execution. Warren Lee Hill, an intellectually disabled man with an IQ of 70, was condemned to death for murder in Georgia. His execution was stayed 2 times, in 2013 and 2014, shortly before the execution. The third time he was executed in 2015. The third reasons why we can look at the death penalty as torture is that the prisoners might not be told about the execution until shortly before it takes place. The Japan prisoners are told about the execution only hours before. Relatives are not informed until after the execution. The slide shows the execution chamber in Tokyo Detention House, and you can see the limb in the floor and the hook in the ceiling. The last reason is a so-called botched execution that is often reported. It is executions that one way or the other goes wrong. The prisoners show signs of pain and severe distress, and the execution are often prolonged. An example is Clayton Lockett, who was executed in 2014 in Oklahoma. It was a very prolonged execution. He seemed to be half awake during the process. And although the execution was stopped, he died from a heart attack after 43 minutes. The right to life and death penalty as torture are important. And the third and very important reason why the medical profession have to care is the medical involvement. Lethal injection with medicine is of course in focus, but doctors and other medical personnel are involved in the death penalty from the first forensic examinations till writing the death certificate. Marianne Kastrup will deal with point 1, mental retardation and mental illness in the next presentation. Doctors' testimonies as expert witnesses during trials can be very problematic. A grotesque example is a Texas professor of forensic psychiatry, James Grigson. In almost every case, Dr. Grigson testified that the defendant was an incurable sociopath who was 100% certain to kill again. He usually met the defendant for just a few minutes or not at all. 118 prisoners were condemned to death after Dr. Grigson had testified. Involvement of medical personnel on death row is another severe problem. Prisoners spend many years on death row, often in solitary confinement. They often develop psychiatric and somatic diseases, and doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals are expected to treat these often severe disorders that often blocks for the execution to go on. The treatment might end up with the prisoner again being fit for execution. So treating the patient actually results in his death. If we turn to the medical participation in executions, the problems with lethal injections with medicine is obvious. But doctors have participated and still participate in execution with other methods, like hanging, shooting, and the electric chair. But use of medicine, medical equipment, and technology are, of course, in focus for us. Besides medical personnel, you need medicine and equipment, grips, syringes, needles, etc. for the execution. The US states using lethal injection have experienced increasing difficulties buying medicine for executions. This started when the Danish pharmaceutical company Lundbeck in 2011 introduced strict end-user restrictions on their sale of pentobarbital, a drug used for executions. Since then, most pharma companies have adopted similar restrictions. Several companies producing medical equipment have adopted similar sales limitations. Use of organs for transplantation purposes is another problem. In China, organs from executed prisoners are used for transplantation. In order to get fresh organs, execution by lethal injection can take place in vans parked near the hospital where the patient waits to receive a new heart, kidney, etc. China has declared that this practice will be gradually phased out, but reliable information is hard to get from China. I will now turn to our group and our work. I will briefly tell about the history, how we work, and some results. The two main reasons to start the group was the adoption of the Stockholm Declaration mentioned earlier and the introduction of lethal injection. As we are the only group of its kind in the world, we had and still have a close cooperation with the International Secretariat. Unfortunately, the medical office at the International Secretariat was closed 10 years ago, and the death penalty team has been severely slimmed down. We receive information, campaign material, and urgent actions with relevance for our work from the International Secretariat. We furthermore do some research ourselves, and we have a fine cooperation with the Danish Medical Association. We plan to focus many of our activities on one country at a time, and right now it is Japan. When we turn to the results of our work, I will mention three achievements. First, the adoption of declarations by medical associations. The World Medical Association, of which most national medical associations are members, is an important example. It has taken a definite stand against doctors' participation in capital punishment, and it recommends a global moratorium on execution. The Council of the Nordic Medical Associations has adopted a similar resolution, but including that the death penalty is an unacceptable punishment. And the International Council of Nurses has adopted a resolution like the WMA, and furthermore urges nurses to lobby for abolition. The Chinese Medical Association is a member of the World Medical Association. At a World Medical Association meeting in Copenhagen in 2007, the organization agreed that transplantations from prisoners should not take place. And lastly, I will mention Lundbeck. After intense lobbying and actions during the first half year of 2011, Lundbeck took back control with the distribution of pentobarbital and denied selling to prisons using the medicine for executions. Many pharma companies have copied Lundbeck's guidelines. Before I finish, I will inform you that more detailed information on medical issues on the death penalty and on our group can be found on this website, our website. It is under the Danish Amnesty website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. That was really interesting. And I also recognized many of the things that you mentioned from the Swedish medical group. And having been with Amnesty for many years, I do remember the Lundbeck case and what a symbolic international case that was. Since our last speaker also is from the Danish medical group, I will hand over to her, Marianne Kastrup, and let you introduce yourself and go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Should soon be there. Marianne, would you like to introduce yourself?
I will, yes.
Yeah.
I'm a psychiatrist, and like Jacob, I'm a member of the Danish medical group against death penalty. And what I'm going to share with you is a short presentation on the mental health aspects of the death penalty. Thank you. Next. Yes. So why is it important to discuss this issue at all? Next. Let me first introduce some of the legal aspects. Next. In most countries, there are mental health laws that are related to persons with mental illness. It may relate to criminal laws, but it can also be, in some countries, they have laws related to whether or not you are fit for trial or fit for execution. And of course, it is a very important question whether persons with severe mental illness should stand trial and ultimately risk death penalty. Next. The whole judicial process is important. First of all, if you suffer from a serious mental illness, you may have certain disadvantages when you're going to defend yourself. And very often the legal system may not do justice due either because stigma against mental illness or lack of knowledge about mental illness. Next. There are two particular reasons. One may be that the defense counsel is not very experienced in dealing with mentally ill persons. Another one can be that there's a shortage of time, so you don't have sufficient time to get this, or that the person with a mental illness may not be very fit for seeking appropriate legal help and thereby having insufficient safeguards to protect their rights. Next. We all know, and we heard it already, that there are many associations that are banning death penalty for particular groups. And I just mentioned here the American Bar Association as well as the American Psychiatric Association. They have called for a ban on death penalty for those with severe mental illness. This is just a few of the many associations that are focusing on the mentally ill. Next. Another issue relates to intellectual disabilities. We heard in earlier presentations that persons with a low IQ have still been executed, but according to the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, you should not impose a death penalty on persons whose intellectual disability impede them for having an effective defense. Next. Let us look at some diagnostic issues. Next. It's important, and this does not take place in all countries, that prior to trial, there is an appropriate, thorough examination of apprehended persons so that you find out whether a person is suspected of psychiatric illness and whether that person needs particular assessment prior to any conviction. Next. Nevertheless, if you look at different studies that have been carried out, there are studies from the United States showing that at least 20% of people on death rows do have a serious mental illness. And there has been another study looking at people who have been executed in the States between 2000 and 2015, and 43% of those inmates had received a mental illness diagnosis sometime during their lives, which is a very high percentage, you may say. A recent study in India showed even worse, that 60% of those who were staying on a death row in certain Indian prisons had mental illness, and the longer time they stayed on death row and anticipating their possible execution, the worse became their mental illness. So this to me shows that the issue is very pertinent and that we have to be aware of it. Next, please. Let us look at the medical profession in relation to this. Next. As already heard by Jakob, we know that medical issues should be applied whenever a doctor is working. And this is also the case with forensic psychiatrists. That is that they should apply ethical principles just as any other medical profession, and that a forensic psychiatrist should see his or her first duty towards the patient, not towards the state control system. Next. It's also very important, and we have heard it already, that we have to dissociate doctors from the execution process and condemn doctors to participate and use medical knowledge and technology for this person. And this has been a very essential part of the work of the Danish medical group. Next. Nevertheless, we have to understand that for us, and I have mentioned here European doctors, because we are all in this audience from Europe, and there's not death penalty in the countries that we are dealing with. So it may be difficult for us to understand how doctors can be involved in capital punishment. But should things happen, I mean, nothing is ever, you never know what may happen in future. Should it be introduced, death penalty, again in Western European countries, we certainly hope that the medical profession would set its face against it and not participate in any kind of death penalty and also assessing people. Next, please. Having said that, of course, as a psychiatrist, seeing a person with a psychosis, it is in general ethical, of course, to treat the psychosis. But if you treat a prisoner psychotic illness with the sole purpose that that person subsequently may be executed, then it's not an ethical thing to do. Then it's fairly unethical to do that. And in countries where you perform capital punishment, an evaluation of competence to be executed normally follows psychiatric and legal evaluation, and after the prisoner has been sentenced, and thereby it's part of the execution. Next, please. So looking at the psychiatric aspect, just to say that, first of all, one has to be very careful when examining a defendant that that person is fully aware of what is the significance of the examination, what may be the ultimate outcome of that medical examination vis-a-vis subsequent execution. And it's also very important that it may not always be the case that you see an adequate cross-examination of the psychiatric testimony. And next. So the question is it morally justifiable that psychiatrists decide who is fit for execution, and that psychiatrists treat psychotic persons with the consequence that that persons may subsequently and ultimately be found fit for execution? And of course, we find that the answer is definitely a no. Next. And this is the last thing to say, that in the World Psychiatric Association, when they established the Madrid Declaration, which is the ethical rule governing psychiatric profession in 1996, it was unanimously passed the statement that under no circumstances should psychiatrists participate in legally authorized executions, nor participate in any assessment of competence to be executed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And that concludes our first hour or so of the initial presentations. And so I will open up now for questions and discussion. And I also have some follow-up questions for you, but I am keen to let the audience in. And I know that Diana Bendik-Stenberg had a question before, so please go ahead and ask your question. And when you do ask questions, you can either write them in the chat if you want to, but also raise, if you would like to ask it yourself, you can raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. And also please mention if it's one of the specific speakers that you want to answer, or we can also let all of the speakers answer if it's a question that is relevant for all of their topics. Go ahead, Diana.
Right, thank you. First, I would like all of you to thank you very much for the most interesting presentations, and to you, Maria, for guiding all this. And then I have my question about Iran. So it's a two-part question. So the first part is, what can the international community and the European Union, etc., do against the Iran government? And the second part of my question is, there have been a lot of discussion that one part could be to declare this revolutionary guards, which are the ones who are responsible for this violence in Iran. So to declare them a terrorist organization. And there have been a lot of discussion or recommendation that the European Union should do that, but they haven't done it yet. So to know a bit more about this situation regarding those issues. Yeah, that's my question.
Thank you very much. Very important questions. Thank you. Indeed, the EU can do a lot that they do not do. We see on the example of Russia. If we have sanctions against Iran, and we have sanctions against Russia. To have effective results from the sanctions, you have to hurt the people who we want them to change something. And you can just a second, please. Sorry. To reach this effect, we have to have sanctions against persons who are responsible, against, as it was in Russia, against Putin and his family members, against government and their family members, against oligarch systems in Russia and their family members. That is not happening to Iran. In Iran, the Revolutionary Guards and the Khamenei, they have 2/3 of the commerce in their hands. All the commerce which is happening with EU and other Western countries, all these companies are part of the power, are part of the Revolutionary Guards, are part of the Khamenei office. Khamenei office has, I think, about 5,000 employees. And they are from military industry until some for example, pharmaceutical industry, part of these companies. We had 2 weeks ago, some weeks ago, the European Congress of Nuclear Medicine in Vienna, a huge congress, and there was a huge company from Iran supporting the congress and had a big place to represent their products here in Vienna to other European countries. It means if we want to be effective against the violence in Iran, we have the ways, just we have to copy it from the sanctions that we are doing against Russia to Iran, and that is not happening. And to put the Revolutionary Guards on the list of the terrorists, at the beginning I was in favor of it, but I think it doesn't change a lot. Most important is to reach them in their financial activities. That is the only thing that it can hurt them. As we see now, just to say a word about the crime which is happening in Israel, Hamas is supported. They say it officially that the money comes from Iran. And some weeks ago, five prisoners with double citizenship were released from Iran, and for this release, they released $5 or $6 or $7 million of Iranian money, and they got this money. We have to reach them where they are active in finance market, and we can do it, and we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Siroos, for that answer. I will follow up with another question for you, Siroos, since you mentioned the newly announced Nobel Peace Prize winner, Narges Mohammadi, a case that I think that you have worked with in the past. And I wanted to ask you a question that I have also received here, which is, what do you, or how do you think the prize will affect her situation? Some people say, oh, this may be a problem to her and make her situation worse, and some people think it will also make it better. What's your take on how it will affect her situation?
That's also a very important question. It will, at least it will be a support. As I showed before, we have different kinds of killings that the state is using, and they will not make use of it, at least in the future time, in the next 2-3 years, until she's famous for her for the prize, and she is present in the media and so on. That will protect her from being killed by the government. That will help. It will not help her to come out from prison. That is for sure, because they calculate exactly. Last week, Majid Tawakkoli, a very young student, very well-minded student, human rights activist in Iran. He was brought again to prison after 2-3 years being outside of prison. I talked to him on phone last week before he was again imprisoned. He said the government calculate exactly if you are more harmful to them if you are outside or inside the prison. So they decide now this person should be in the prison, the other person could be out of prison for 1 to 3 months. Okay, and for this they will keep Narges in the prison because she speaks out what she has on the heart. She cannot be silent. That is her type, her character, and therefore they will keep her in the prison until the situation is maybe more calm than now. But for the moment, for the coming months or 2-3 years at least, they will keep her there in the prison. But that will, the prize, the international sound will protect her. That is for sure.
Thank you, Siroos. That's very interesting to hear. So going back to a question regarding Amnesty International's work against the death penalty and what Jacob said, you mentioned, you gave a historical backdrop also in your presentation. And I was wondering what you think has changed, those of you who have worked on medical issues and the death penalty over the course of the years. What do you think has changed for you with Amnesty's work? And also, what do you see in the future? Jacob, you mentioned, for example, that the position of the medical advisor in Amnesty's International Secretariat, which I know was a very important person, that position was cut. I understand now that there's a new person who may take over some of the medical issues, which I was very happy to hear. But I would like to hear from the panel what you think has changed for you when it comes to work on the death penalty and also medical issues and how you see the future for that area. So I'll kind of leave it open. Maybe you would like to start, Jacob, but the rest of you are also very welcome to come in with your ideas.
Well, if I should give a short historical review, then the medical group started with a Danish medical group 50 years ago in the beginning of the 70s. At that time, it was focused on torture with examination of torture victims, missions, and things like that. And there was a group doing letter writing actions with dealing with actions with a medical component, you can say. Furthermore, during the years that followed, more medical groups popped up around in national amnesty groups around the world. And in the beginning of the 80s, a medical advisor was established in the International Secretariat with a medical office. So there was a good development with more groups, more work, and it broadened out with the death penalty issue coming in also in the beginning of the 80s. But due to this downsizing of the medical work, you can say that the medical office was closed and the medical advisor was not anymore in the International Secretariat. That happened around 10 years ago. I think it has meant that many groups has disappeared. When we tried to establish an international cooperation between the medical groups, as Agneta mentioned. And we wrote out to a lot of national sections, but only received a positive reply from those you can see here, the Swedish, the Austrian, and then also the German medical groups. So I am a little concerned about how it will continue. But as you mentioned, there is a person at the International Secretariat that will be dealing with health issues and medical work too. But at this moment, we are not quite aware of how much it will be, how much time she will have to do this work. And there's been some change in persons at the IS2 on this issue. So I think it's a bit difficult to predict how it will develop. But we hope this cooperation between the national medical groups will be able maybe to develop this work, and maybe to do that some more medical groups can turn up in other national Amnesty what do you call it, in other countries where there are no medical groups at the time. Was that some kind of an answer to your question?
Yes, very good. Thank you so much. And Siroos, did I see your hand? Do you want to add on to that?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to add some more points. As all the speakers they told, especially Jakob and Marianne, we have a lot of medical aspects in regarding death penalty. And regarding to Iran, again, my focus, the undefined cases of death in the prison. These are also related to the death penalty, and they have to be investigated. We don't know what is happening, and therefore, at least for the time being and for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I think it would be very good that the medical office in London would be again active and to change some ideas and make some research on it and see what is really happening, because we will, if not, we will forget the cases maybe and lose all the information that the little information that we have now. I would appreciate if an active member would take over the medical part in London. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hand over to Marianne. You also want to answer this one?
I don't want to repeat what Jakob and Siroos already said, but I think maybe we also, as medical doctors, have an obligation to somehow make it more visible. Why are health aspects important in the work of, not only in death penalty, but in the work of Amnesty International? And I think that in the Danish group, we have been quite lucky with respect to our collaboration with the Secretariat in Denmark. And somehow I think maybe that we, as medical doctors, have to tell our national association, not only International Secretariat in London, but also our national association, why is it that it is important to get the health aspect when it comes to the work of Amnesty International. So I think it goes both ways. But I'm also a bit hesitant, because when you see that previously the office in London was more situated physically also in London, now we hear from our collaborators that they are scattered all around. So I'm a bit worried that it can be so diversified that it can be difficult to find who is it that we are going to work on to increase the health professionals aspect. But I think we we have to do something in order to increase the interest in the Secretariat for health professional aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you to all the panelists. I don't see any other hands or questions in the chat. Yes, Inger, I see a hand. Inger Sjöberg, go ahead. Inger, you're still muted. You're still muted, Inger.
I don't think I can unmute either.
We don't seem to be able to unmute you, Inger. If you have a look at your computer and see if you can do it, and I'll let Diana ask her question first, and then I'll come back to you. Diana, go ahead.
All right. Well, actually, it was more a comment rather than a question. Sorry. I'm here as a non-medical person and in this whole community because I've been working on the death penalty subject for many years, and I've expressed many times how impressed I am about our medical groups in Sweden and around the world. I mean, this competence, this commitment, dedication. I think you guys, you deliver an amazing, very important work to Amnesty's work, and it's not only me, but there are many Amnesty members who really appreciate your contribution. And I think we really should do everything to keep the doctors within our community and to use your resources, because you have so much to contribute to this work. So this is a comment. And then another thing is what we discussed many times within Amnesty. I think we have a bit this issue that we have to spread our resources on so many subjects, and all the subjects are important, which we're working on, but somehow I think we just losing a bit momentum for the core, for what we call the core subjects. And I agree, but all the other issues that we work on are very important, but we risk a bit that Amnesty's work is a bit, turns out a bit like all over the place, and we try to do many things without and lose momentum for really important issues. I think we have to, as an organization, we have to set prioritize in a different way. But I mean, this has been a discussion within the whole Amnesty organization in different countries and for many years, and it's a difficult one. I fully understand it, but somehow we must find ways to focus on our work. And I really hope that we keep the medical groups here and integrated in the work. I think you're doing such an important work. So that's something I wanted to comment.
Thank you, Diana. And now I see that Inger managed, I think Inger.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, I agree with Marianne that it's very essential that Amnesty understands that in almost all cases with prisoners, there are health problems, especially if they don't get medicine, but many other cases also. So there we can do something, maybe to tell people that this, if they don't get the medicine, that is almost death penalty. You will die. You will die from tuberculosis, or lots of different things. So medical questions are very essential in Amnesty. And I was thinking of something also, that perhaps we should also talk with lawyers, we used to have a lawyers organization in Swedish Amnesty, but we don't have anymore, to communicate. And in all these countries with prisoners, maybe doctors could talk with the lawyer. We hear of unfair trials. Maybe we could communicate with lawyers and judges, so we could get a better word that way. I don't know. Is that something you have thought of? You who are talking like Siroos, have you thought of that? You talked about the unfair trials.
Thank you, Inger, so much. I'm sorry, Siroos, I won't let you come in because I promised that we would try to end on time, but I think you have each other's contact details, the Swedish and Austrian medical groups, so maybe this is something that you can keep on discussing afterwards. I do agree with you, Inger, the issue of health issues in prisons and sometimes people dying from lack of healthcare within prison is a huge issue when it comes to human rights work. I wanted to finish up by thanking all of the eminent panelists so much for your presentations and your time. I also wanted to thank all of the medical groups who arranged and contributed to this webinar. And all of you that came in to participate and listen and ask questions. I would like to end with a quote that inspired Amnesty's founder, Peter Benenson, when he wrote the article that sparked the Amnesty International movement, which also is the background for the Amnesty symbol, the candle within barbed wire. And the quote is, "It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." And lighting a candle of hope, I think that's what we all need to continue doing with this important work for human rights in all of our lives, no matter what our profession and what we're doing. But it's definitely something that will give us hope in times that sometimes may seem very dark. So it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And with those words, I would like to thank all of you so much and hope to see you again, maybe on screen or in the future when it comes to human rights work. Big thank you to all of you.
Thank you.
And good night.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Maja, and thanks to the speakers, thanks to the audience from the medical groups. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.
Bye. Thank you very much, Maria.